Hey guys, we should be live.
Hold on, Jim, I can't hear you.
Etienne, seriously? Welcome to Talking Cannabis. I love it. Hey guys, we should be live.
Hold on, Jim, I can't hear you.
Welcome to Talking Cannabis.
Tell Mel to click the microphone link.
Welcome to Talking Cannabis. Hey, everyone.
We got your feedback, Todd.
I apologize, everybody. It's always fun. Welcome. We had today, Jim. You're gonna have to, Mel Frank. You're gonna have to unmute your microphone. I can't unmute it for you. There. Welcome to Talking Cannabis. Today we have Tom Alexander. Tom, thank you for joining us. We have Sam the Skunk Man. Thank you, Sam. We also have Kenny. Thank you for showing up today. And Mel Frank. Thank you for waking up and joining us too. And Etienne always.
Morning.
Sorry about the rocky start, but we're just starting, so we'll get better at this over time. Can you hear us, Mel?
I hear you.
I don't think we can hear him.
No, I can see his lips moving, but nothing's happening, unfortunately.
Tell him
He
to
is
click
muted
his
right
microphone.
now. Yeah, you got to unmute your mic if you can hear me. He and I were talking earlier, having no problems either. It's just, yep. Let me try. Well, good morning, everybody. Thanks again for joining us, Tom. I'm not sure what's happening with. Can you say something, Mel? No, he's having issues with his mic. Well, it happens. Good morning, everybody. Let me see if I can get Jim on, and I'll get him going. So what have you been up to?
I think you can click the mic symbol in your photograph down at the bottom of the page, or up at the top in the where the camera and all the other and the on and off is.
Yeah, he's probably in settings. He doesn't have his microphone selected.
But we heard his voice fine just a little bit ago.
Yeah, I know. I know. Well, anyway, it's a slow way to start, and
the problem is it was better with just his voice because we don't see the picture if he doesn't have a voice.
Yeah, I think he's just going to restart his computer.
Well, we see you, Mel. We can't hear you, buddy.
Yeah. I'm telling him what to do.
He obviously believes he should be seen but not heard.
I'm going to put headphones on us.
So, what's going on in the world of cannabis this week?
Well, David and I were talking about. Did you fix that?
Yeah, I'm going to put on headphones.
I wish I had a ruler to wrap you with.
Yeah, I was wondering if that was going to take place.
What'd you do? Go to Catholic school?
Present.
No, but my wife did.
I went for 9 years. I was an altar boy.
Look at the damage it caused.
I was an altar boy. We'd go in before mass and drink the wine and eat the hosts.
We would just drink the wine. We saved the host for later. You know, kind of like an amuse-bouche.
The priest actually leave that wine so the kids get drunk and he can abuse them.
Well, so David found out some interesting things about the Samui Laval book.
Yes.
You know, we were just having that conversation as far as in regards to why the book exists, the titles and everything else. It's kind of a fascinating thing. Especially, you know, like I said, the thing that fascinates me even more now is why they spent all that money to produce 36,000 copies. That's pretty incredible.
That's a large print run for such an artsy book, for sure. Yeah.
Well, it's the largest format book regarding cannabis of its day. I mean, it's still pretty. I don't know really anybody who's done a larger format book, and that's from what, 33 years ago?
1984, and that's kind of the, like I said, the interesting thing. You had produced 36,000 copies. You'd be very passionate about that project and have a lot of, a lot of confidence that there was a lot of interest. But
I'm pretty sure the reason it was so
at a book reselling bizarre kind of sort of thing.
I'm pretty sure the reason it was so big is so that it would be handy for hash smugglers who want to put hash in book covers and send it from one country to another.
There you go.
Nobody would ever suspect a hashish book full of hash.
No, I completely agree with that. So, yeah, I still want to get to the bottom of the story and figure out why it exists in the first place.
We're talking about the book Hashish by Swami Laval, which is right behind Kenny, which is a large format book that came out in the mid-'80s. People were asking in chat what book we were talking about specifically. We talked about it on the first edition last week, and this is still one of the quintessential books to have in your library regarding the many different hashish production methodologies that were common back, or most common back in the 80s. Wouldn't you agree, Tom? Do you know any book that covers any more?
No, that's the one.
It is the best picture book. Rob's book is better for technique and history and all that kind of issues, but Swami's is the best one photographically.
Yeah, it romanticizes the whole thing. I mean, it goes to multiple geographic locations and the photos, and I mean, it sets a time, a place, and it's pretty incredible.
Yeah.
When I first saw it, it really struck me for, I mean, just, I've never seen anything like it. I may have seen snippets of a picture from something, but to see that compilation of that large a format, which was, we're talking, somebody had to have a Hasselblad camera back in the day running around when they took those photos, because they're really large format.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
I went to a bookshop that remainders books, and they had several hundred of those. They were selling for $10 a pop.
That just blows my mind. But yeah, it sounds like the sales were pretty low, and a lot of those books were remaindered, so to speak.
Yeah, I bought 10 of them, but I gave them all away except for 2 I still have.
Dang.
It's a very rare book. I saw it one day back when I was working for Ed Rosenthal. I saw one in his library because just of the sheer size of it. And when I saw it, I was like, I have to find it. And it took me years to actually find a copy.
You can find it on eBay and Amazon as long as you're willing to spend $250.
So yeah, one of the wholesale distributors that promoted that book and a lot of others, Homestead Book Company, closed down about a month ago. David Tatelman retired and sold the building, tried to sell the business, but nobody wanted to buy it. But he helped a lot of the authors wholesale the books to bookstores, head shops. And
Homestead was great.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, they're an FS Book Company. They were the only game in town for many, many years.
And then Andor.
Yeah, correct.
And Last Gas.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Last Gas was really, I guess, the last gasp holding on.
Nice. Mel just rebooted. He should be back with us shortly.
Very nice.
Yeah. You know, if it wasn't for the early publishing houses, and this is why I think, Tom, you've always been such a hero to me, because you were taking a stand against such an oppressive, I mean, during the Reagan years, it was really the birth time of, you know, DARE and Just Say No and all of this crazy spending. And in my eyes, what you were doing was revolutionary, obviously, because it caused a revolution in a lot of ways. Look at all the people growing Sensibilia now. And also, it taught us something that wasn't being, it was illegal to learn. I mean, when I was a kid in high school, I was afraid to draw a pot leaf on my anything because I didn't want the association of getting in trouble. And here you were publishing materials that the government was trying to destroy and do away with. And this is why I saw you as a literary hero, a very brave one at that. And how many, as a publisher, I would love to ask you, how many peers did you feel you even had in the 80s?
Well, obviously Jim, or Mel, and Ed, and Robert Connell Clark, but not many. I just did it more out of anger and frustration that they stole my crop, and then they tried to sell it, the law enforcement. So I did it as more out of frustration and anger, and try to get back at them that way. I was going to go ahead.
Cops that stole it, did they get caught?
Yeah, the state police arrested 3 of the sheriffs.
Cool.
And the thing that really put me over the edge was I was facing 20 years, $100,000 fine, and the district attorney, after the 3 sheriffs pleaded no contest, he pleaded with the judge to give them 3 years probation because they suffered enough and lost their careers, and that's what the judge gave them. And that's sort of what propelled me to do what I did. Hey, Mel.
Hey, can you hear me?
Awesome.
We
Hey, Mel.
hear you.
And we see you.
Wow.
Good morning, Mel.
You guys
Life
look so
is amazing.
Wow, I've got a funny hat on. The image I get is of your little thing sitting in the corner there.
Yeah. Well, thank you for waking up and doing this. We were just talking about Sensimilia Tips, and there not being many other publishing houses that were putting out the information that you, Tom, even High Times to a large degree, but not so much focused, and Rob and others were putting out about cannabis. Your peer group was small when it came to publishing in the 70s and 80s.
Right.
What?
Yeah, Andor really, I think, got things going very much. I mean, with the Deluxe having sold so many copies, and they did Journey X book, they did Stark's book, Cannabis Chemistry, I think it was called. And I think, didn't they do Rich's book, the Sensimilia Flowers book? That really nice color book.
Did you ever meet those authors and the photographer that did
I didn't, but it was the first thing that I read about marijuana coming from the industry that I thought, hey, this is a really nice book. Whatever else I saw.
I absolutely agree. It's a wonderful book.
Right. So,
Mel, when did you realize you had to self-publish?
when Andor Press wasn't paying me any money. Selling the shit out of my book, but not paying me. So that worked. Yeah, I think.
Well, can I ask you this? However, did you get your first article in Rolling Stone back in 1971?
Well, actually, it wasn't in Rolling Stone per se. It was in what was called the New York section of Rolling Stone, which was put in and distributed in the New York area. And what happened is that actually I was just between jobs, sort of thing, and I said to a friend of mine, well, I got to do something here to make the rent. And he said, why don't you write an article and we'll get it published. Now, that was easy for him to say since he was an accomplished journalist. And since then, I won a Pulitzer Prize with the Boston Globe. But at the time, he was writing for like the Village Voice and some other papers. But anyway, I said, well, I'm not a writer. I don't know how to write. And also, I don't know anything to write about. And he said, don't worry about that. He said, think of something that you do know. And he said, and write something up and I'll help you. And that's exactly what happened. And the first place I went to was Rolling Stone in New York.
And did you see the book by Dave Fleming?
Yes, I did. I saw that about, I think it was 74 maybe, 73.
I think the first one came out in 69 or 70.
Never saw it. I saw it in a window in a bookstore in the West Village, and I bought it. Right. And what was nice about that book is he had a kind of fatherly way of talking, and it gave me confidence that other people were doing this and that sort of thing. Didn't really learn much from it, but liked the fact that there were other people out there.
Dave Fleming was a friend of mine. He was a really nice guy who spent a lot of time down in Mexico, was hoping to use that money to finance farms in California. But instead, he made a lot of money and became a crack addict.
Oh, okay. Heard that story before.
So Mel, when you finally published your first article, how was it received? What were you feeling? Do you feel it was well received, or it was fell on deaf ears?
The publisher actually said to me, well, this is funny. I just got another article on marijuana. So he said, well, we'll have to go over them. So then maybe a week later, he called me and he said, we decided to publish your article in a 2-part series. I said, oh, that's great. And he said, well, what name do you want to use? And of course, I hadn't thought of this since, you know, my name wasn't out in public. And I had 3 cats then, Melon, Yami, and Frank. And I came up with Mel Frank on the spot in a matter of seconds. And I've been using it ever since. But anyway, then what happened is he put me in touch with Ed Rosenthal, or Ed Rosenthal in touch with me because he contacted me. And I agreed to meet him. His article was about him, really, installing these little 4-foot fluorescent gardens with 4-inch pots and that sort of thing. And he'd come to your place and set it up and tell you how to grow. So anyway, within 5 minutes of meeting him, he said, we should write a book. And I didn't really want to write a book with Ed Rosenthal. But he was very persistent. And this went on.
Aren't you remembering that what he actually said was, why don't you write a book so I can edit it for you?
Well, listen, give Ed credit. Ed took maybe a year out on the West Coast finding a publisher, and he did. He found a little publisher in San Francisco, Level Press. And they published that little book for, I think it was $3.50 or something, and we each got 17.5 cents a copy. At least we thought we were getting that.
Is that the one with the cassette?
Yeah, the cassette is another one. I never got paid a dime for any of that.
Did Level Press pay you?
I haven't gotten paid for in my life. Anyway, Ed did, you know, give him credit. My life wouldn't be what it is without Ed going out there and finding a publisher, right? But once that happened and I saw the book in print, I was, by that time I was in college, and I got serious about the idea of doing a really good book on marijuana, at least with everything that was known at the time. And at the time, it was considered a very mysterious plant. In fact, Richard Schultes, when he had the symposium, I think it was about 1970, on marijuana, that was one of the things he opened the conference with, by saying it's a mysterious plant, an unknown plant, that sort of thing. That wasn't quite true. It was actually a very well-known plant until it became illegal, right? Because it was really involved in just about everything through you know, the 19th century for sure, and then a good part of the 20th century too. But the government was very effective in killing everything, killing the seed industry, killing the hemp industry, and of course, killing the medical industry also, in terms of just marijuana.
Pre-1937, cannabis was one of the most common medicines.
Right, absolutely, absolutely. And, you know, I said this in an interview the other day. You know, I don't have many regrets in my life, but one of my regrets is not working with Todd McCormick more. You know, I should have been more cognizant of the medical aspects and that we could take them somewhere. And, you know, then I was just trying to stay out of jail and grow pot and breed the plants that were useful. But yeah, it's a shame that you know, Todd didn't live to see what's happening now.
Well, he was a huge catalyst in making that reality that we have today. So he helped shape that, and we'll never forget that.
Absolutely, right.
He was also a serious smoker.
Yeah. If listeners don't know, Todd McCormick wrote a book that basically compiled the literature on the medical aspects of marijuana. And some of the things go back, you know, to I think the 1840s or something with O'Shaughnessy, the O'Shaughnessy doctor in Calcutta.
1865 to 1972, I believe. And Todd was really the first whistleblower, because at the time he was working for what became the National Mental Institute of Health. And he discovered that a lot of the information coming out of Israel in the early 60s, we have to realize that Meshulam discovered THC in 63. And initially the United States government had that information classified. And when Dr. Mikaria was working there with clearance, he found all this information about THC and cannabis and it being medically beneficial. And it just sparked his interest. And he realized that it was against his oath to help people to keep this information buried. And he quit his job. He compiled what became the Indian Hemp Drugs Commission report. And it was 100 years of medical history of cannabis that the government was keeping basically classified. And he did everything he could until his dying day to push that information and to teach people about the medical benefits of cannabis.
Was that his first book, or was Marijuana Papers his first book?
I believe Marijuana Papers was probably his first book, and then the compilation came together while he was putting that together.
I have some of the original copies of the Indian Hemp Commission report printed in 1893 in Simla.
He was such a hero to me. He is one of the last interviews he did before he got cancer ended up being the movie that I put together with my friends when I got out of prison, the Union, The Business Behind Getting High, and it's available free on the internet. You can find it, and it's a beautiful interview with Dr. Todd McCormick, and I highly recommend people check it out. He was really, Dr. McCormick and Dr. Lester Grinspoon, in my opinion, were the two doctors that spearheaded the turnaround in the way that medical professionals looked at cannabis as a potential healing agent.
They were both proponents. Dr. Meshulam was not a proponent of recreational cannabis, but he's the one that really busted cannabis open once he had THC, and then his extended team discovered the CB1 and CB2 receptors, and then anandamide. And that's what busted cannabis open. That's when the pharmaceutical industries got really interested.
Right. Definitely. I mean, but how long was Marinol in creation before it hit the pike, before it was allowed to be sold in, I believe it was 86?
It belonged to the NIDA, and they sold it to Unimed. And that was in 1981.
Hold on. I don't understand what you just said. Why did NIDA have dronabinol? Why did they create it? I don't understand.
They were the first one to either patent it or license it. I don't remember exactly.
It would be
they sold it to Unimed and promised Unimed a fast track.
Wow.
And the reason they did that was to prevent herbal smoking of cannabis for medicine. They tried to sabotage it by launching a THC product.
Incredible. Wow. When did you guys first hear about it, Tom and Mel Frank? Obviously, you guys had your ear to the ground back then. Is that something that you saw in development for a long time?
Of Marinol?
Yes.
Well, I met Robert Randall at a normal conference in '83, and that's when I first heard of it. Or '84, I think.
Right. So those watching, Robert Randall was a speechwriter in Washington, D.C. who got busted growing some pot plants on his deck and sued because he was in D.C. Obviously, it doesn't have statehood, so it was a federal case, and he won. And he then sued for access because he found out the United States government was growing pot at the University of Mississippi. And he decided basically that they should be donating cannabis to people that were sick or start a program. And the Compassionate Investigational New Drug Program was founded. I'm not sure what year, but Robert Randall was the first patient to start receiving medical cannabis from the Mississippi farm. He then created an organization called ACT, which was Alliance for Cannabis Therapeutics. And he streamlined the process of paperwork so that other people who had medical conditions could get into the program, which basically caused the program to close because he
there
overwhelmed.
was maybe 10 or 15 people in the compassionate program, and then he did what you said to help AIDS patients who wanted it, and it crashed because hundreds of people applied.
As well they should have. And now only 2 people receive cannabis on that program from the federal government, Elvia Musica and Irv Rosenfield, and someday we will have them both on. They're both our friends. So
a funny thing about Robert Randall, who I met and I considered a friend, he honestly felt that herbal cannabis gave medical relief. Hashish did not.
well, then, in a sense, it just goes to show he did not understand cannabis, because if he thought that he was getting the medical release from cannabis flowers and he wasn't getting it from hashish, he just simply didn't understand hashish.
But it's also
Absolutely correct. I tried to enlighten him, but he just refused to believe me.
And at the
Right.
parties, he wouldn't partake with any of us. He would smoke his stuff he got from the government and wouldn't take anything from us. And
Government swag.
yeah,
Well, to his credit, and I want to say this too, he was under basically a contract that, and if he was seen smoking your stuff or passing his stuff, he could have lost his prescription.
Right.
And guys like Irvin Rosenfeld has made it perfectly clear that even though the government is sending him really crappy stuff, it has still helped his medical condition throughout the years, and he doesn't want to lose it. So he has been very sensitive about smoking in public, smoking around people, people asking him for a hit. He can't do it, and he's not trying to be a bad person. He's like, look, this is seriously my medicine. I wouldn't chop up my doctor's prescription pill and pass it around. It's just, this is what they prescribe me. This is for my medical condition. This is real. And you have to respect that. And I think this goes to show the uphill battle that medical really had for a long time, because people didn't take people seriously. Like for me, I have a big scar on the back of my neck, so you could tell I have a spinal fusion. And when I would turn around and show that to a cop, they would look at it and cringe and understand that, oh, that looks painful. You might be serious about your use being medical. But most of the time, if we said we used marijuana medically, we got kind of laughed at like we were stupid.
Robert Randall had to prove, with the help of his eye doctor, that it helped his glaucoma, but he did.
To me, he was a fantastic hero to the whole movement, and I'm glad we had people like him. He really spearheaded what became a lot of good energy, because I mean, when I first started my activism, I was running around the country with Elvia Musica, and she has been getting marijuana from the federal government since the 80s, and she has been a tireless advocate since she has been getting it, because she believes it helps her so very much. It's helped her keep her sight, and she seems that other people need to have the right to have access to it too. So.
And they weren't giving it people. They had to fight for it before they were given it. They all had to go through lengthy lawsuits and go through, court battles to end up with medical cannabis. And the Compassionate IND program, which he helped make sure it moved on until the 80s, when it was killed due to lies and misinformation.
But it's a double-edged sword sort of thing. I fear what they've been getting for the past 30 years, because Dr. Sue Sisley and the people that are doing the PTSD study in Colorado recently got their NIDA, University of Mississippi product, and it didn't pass microbial, and the THC level wasn't as stated when it left University of Mississippi.
I know Dr. El Sole pretty well, and he definitely has clones that are high THC, but the problem is the NIDA does not contract him to grow those, so he grows swag like they request.
Yeah, but even then, it was infected with fungal matter, I believe, and it came in the form of talcum powder, sort of thing. It was completely ground up from the Research Triangle Institute.
And the battle for medical in the States is going to heat up again, because what's happening is adult social use is merging with the medical, and it's going to be a situation where the patients can't really get the help they need. So this is just off the top of my head. I think we're going to see ballot measures again that specifically dictate the rights and possibilities for medical patients. You know, it's going to be a lot of work again, but in the states that have adult social use, the merging of the two programs, I mean, they did it just a few weeks ago here in California with that bill that merged the two, and it happened in Oregon, and it's happening in Washington and sort of in Colorado. So the fight's not over.
There's two sides of that, because truth be told, when Proposition 215 passed in '96, it was nothing more than the right to present an affirmative defense. It didn't legalize anything. And so for 10 plus years, we had people like me going to prison and getting busted because of the ambiguity of the law. Reality then happened is the city of Los Angeles prosecuted a guy, Patrick Kelly, for 6 plants, 7 plants. He had 1 plant over the SB 420 limit, and they convicted him. Well, he appealed his case, and it went to an appellate court, and 3 judges looked at the 6 plant limit and traced it back to Sacramento and realized that it was an arbitrary number passed by the legislators. So they remanded his case, and he won, because they said that the state legislator did not have any right to limit the scope of the voter-approved initiative. And that made it basically any reasonable amount. So the city of Los Angeles did not like this verdict, and they then appealed it to a 9-judge panel, the California Supreme Court. And in a very rare instance, and people watching can look this up, all 9 judges agreed with the lower court of all 3 judges, who all unanimously ruled that the state legislator had no right to limit the scope of Proposition 215. So any reasonable amount that patients had was a legal amount. And the 6 plant limit was squashed by the California Supreme Court. And anybody watching can type in medical marijuana limits California, and they'll see exactly what I'm talking about. A lot of people don't realize this, but that is the law of the land. And now with medical, people have a legal right to grow 6 plants. I believe what will happen is, unfortunately, people like me will still have to deal with chronic pain or cancer, or my friends that have AIDS or any other serious condition. That won't go away. There'll still be people like Elvie who have glaucoma and are medical patients and won't ever not be medical patients. But like in places like Holland, where you can walk into a coffee shop if you're medical or just an 18-year-old healthy guy that doesn't want to drink a beer, and you can buy some cannabis, it's going to create a situation where people have access. And I believe access is the key, because, you know, Stevie D and others have always mentioned that, you know, all use is medical use. Dennis Perone was on the cover of People back when the law passed, being quoted as all use was medical use. And I totally understand what he's saying, you know, because life has a lot of problems, a lot of stresses, and cannabis helps so many things. But the truth be told, access to people is going to be what is medical to a lot of people. And access is the key to, I think, helping people, and more access just means more help, in my opinion. And people that really have medical conditions, laws like I mentioned, the Patrick Kelly case, are going to reinforce the fact that these people will be able to have access to whatever cannabis they need for their medical condition. And I think that with public opinion the way it is, that's not going to go away. And because of people like, you know, Mel Frank and Tom Yu and others, we all know how to grow our own pot. And that's not going to go away. So now everyone has the right to grow their own cannabis, and that's going to be a bridge of access for their neighbors, their friends, their loved ones, and their significant others. So I don't think medical is going to go anywhere. I just think what we're going to see happening is more of those, you know, like a college kid that doesn't want to booze out with their friends on a Friday night. They can now walk into an alternative shop, pick up some herbs, smoke pot, smoke hash, not wake up with a hangover, remember the people they met, and have a great time. So sorry that was so long, but I don't think medical's going anywhere.
No, in fact, you're going to get discounts. You don't have to pay the tax here, and there'll be a 15% tax here in California. So I have to give Moonbeam, or the governor currently, credit for seeing the need and not rolling it all into the same situation, which is the problem that happened in Washington State. And so we've looked to Washington and Colorado to look from those mistakes. But don't get me wrong. We're going to make mistakes here in California, and those other states, as they come online, will learn from our mistakes and make it better. This is just the reality of the absence of federal interference, is that we're making this up as we go along. And that's the whole reality, is that this prohibition has gone so long that we're just trying to dig ourselves out wherever we are.
Right.
You
And
got to remember, in 1990, there was no medical marijuana companies. All the youth today, they take it for standard. Oh, there's always been medical marijuana companies. No.
And we're going to see those companies dry up too, though. A lot of those companies that are doing it for the patients, but are really doing it for the profits, are just going to start doing it for the profits. And they're not going to have the pretense of bullshit. And I won't miss them, to be honest with you. There are a lot of people that are throwing some really shady stuff to people. And especially what bothers me, it's the people that are most vulnerable, the people that are sick and are looking for help, are getting help from people that are just trying to make money, and they're not delivering what they're promising. And you know, you don't got to go far to see people bashing all the different jerks making Rick Simpson oil whatevers, their version concoctions, and selling it out to people. And you know, because of the lack of education, people don't understand what they're getting. And a lot of times, you know, if you're watching this and you're looking for medicine, unfortunately, you have to be very scrupulous of the people that are growing it and the people that are processing it, because the people processing it oftentimes not the people growing it, and they don't know what the people growing it are using. So you really got to be buyer beware with this. Cannabis is a good drug for a lot of people, but I think there's a lot of people that are doing a lot of not so great things in order to make money in this market right now. And I honestly can't wait to see that go away. I've always hated the pesticide use. I've always hated to see what has happened to Northern California in the last 20 years. We've seen a gold rush of opportunists move up there, clear cut, poison water, do all sorts of things that none of us, you know, organic hippies would have ever dreamed of doing. We always thought the world, you know, the earth was sacred and the place was incredible. And now these people are moving in from all over the place and just, they don't care. Greenhouse, 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 money, 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 and you know, the earth be damned. And I think it's a bad policy. So I'm glad.
I'm going to start a new company called Cravat Emptor. Buyer beware.
Caveat.
Yeah, caveat emptor.
Okay. Well, I'm afraid my Latin is pretty lousy.
So Mel, how long, when did you start growing cannabis? If you were writing about it in 71, obviously you didn't start in 71.
Now, after I got out of the service, I moved to New York, and about maybe a month or two later, over the Christmas break, I finally found somebody who would give me some pot. So it was one of my roommates' brothers came down from Oswego and showed me how to roll a joint and left me 5 rolled joints.
What year was that?
That was the transition from 67 to 68. It was right over that break. So in 68, I would say
perfect timing, because 68, that was the year that Operation Intersect cut off the border between Mexico and California.
Okay, I didn't remember that. But anyway, maybe 2-3 months later, when I got into the market of buying my pot, you know, you buy a lid of or an ounce of Mexican at that time, and you know, most of it was seeds and stems, but you would get well over 1,000 seeds. So I was growing a lot of plants in my apartment, some of them under artificial light, most of them under sunlight. I decided, what the hell, I'm just going to grow my own stuff. And I had a small room that was about 8 by 8 that I started putting in 4-foot fluorescents. That was for the first crop. The next crop, I actually got 8-foot ones. And I didn't buy much of anything. I got those on the streets of New York when, you know, they'd renovate a building, they'd throw out all these old fixtures. And I would just take the transformers and get my own little things, sockets for the tubes, and I put those on an 8-foot length of plywood, 6 8-foot fluorescents, and they came out much better that time. But really, I think I harvested my first one in the fall of 68. That was a long crop. I remember that. The crop was growing like maybe 7-8 months.
What would you classify that cannabis as now? What country of origin do you think it was from?
Oh, it was all, I think it was Colombian, Mexican. And once I started growing it, then I would just ask people to save me seeds from the best pot they had. And I started getting seeds like that. and I have no idea what they were, but there weren't any Afghanis in there. I'll tell you that. It was all sativas.
When
did you see Colombian in the 60s? Because in California, we didn't see it till the 70s.
Yeah, the 70s is really when it came in for me too. I would say right about, yeah, it might have been about 1970 or so. The first time I smoked Colombian and said, wow, this stuff is good. The guy who gave it to me rolled this really skinny joint, and I said, really, is that it? He said, wait till you try this stuff. And now looking back and looking at all the analyses that University of Mississippi did on all these different strains coming in, it was probably about 4 or 5% THC, and probably about 2 or 3% CBN. So, I mean, it's funny how stoned, we would get on stuff that was 2% THC and that sort of thing. But later on, when I was, had the greenhouse in Oakland and was growing, I fully expected the Colombians to be really good because I figured I would have almost pure THC and none of the CBN waste that happened with just about all of it. And that was true. I mean, I grew some Chiba Colombian that probably, I think it was definitely mid-teens. Because when I had it tested, when the University of Mississippi tested that, they were testing a low of fully seeded, unmanicured bud, and it came out over 10% THC. So I think the good carrot would have added another, 50% or something.
When did you first see Afghan?
Not until I came to the West Coast in '76, I think.
1976.
I might have seen it in '75 because I came out for a summer. But I started getting Afghani seeds in '77, probably, I think.
Growers from the Eternal Brotherhood of Eternal Love were growing it in Hawaii in '69, '70, '71.
Yeah, I never saw any of that. What I did get, and I want to set this record straight because I recently, last year, I learned the whole story of this, and that's Afghani 1. And Afghani 1 came to California, Casadero actually, in '78. It was sent 6 seeds out of just some grass. Some visitors got in Kabul, and they found 6 seeds in it, and they mailed it back with clothing and that sort of thing. And they gave those seeds to the best grower in the area, and he grew it out and distributed seeds in the area, and I got those seeds. So that was the crop from '78. In '79, I was growing Afghani 1, and it was just better than any of the other Afghanis I was getting. And I was getting Afghanis actually from the South, from Arkansas, Kentucky, Alabama, Tennessee, that sort of thing, because they would just come and visit. That was probably in '70, '78. '79, because after the Growers Guide came out, these people would find me, I guess, through the publisher, and they bring seeds to trade, and that's how we got rid of the CBD strains because they didn't get us high.
I can tell you that Afghani varieties, I've imported probably, I don't know, thousands and thousands, maybe 100 different times of Afghan seeds, and the vast majority of them were not savers. Right,
exactly. That's what happened. So I just continued with Afghani 1, especially with breeding, because when you crossed it with one of those tropical sativas, I mean, the results were really terrific. And then back crossing them again,
So can I ask you guys, what is the story of Afghani getting into the West Coast? Was it the Brotherhood of Eternal Love that was over there smuggling out?
Or other people? They were definitely involved, but where it all has its most roots could be the Brotherhood, or it could be a handful of other people who were in Afghanistan and brought seeds back.
In the book, either the book by Nick Hsu, Orange Sunshine, or Brotherhood of Eternal Love, one or the other, they talk about a point in time where they went to Maui and they sailed a boat over to Mexico and brought 5,000 pounds of Mexican pot to Maui. So I think a lot of seeds probably came from that too.
Yep, they were also growing in Kauai also.
Gotcha.
So can I ask you guys, is a lot of the stuff that we would refer to as Maui Waui or whatever, wasn't really indigenous to the island. It was brought in by people, do you think in the 60s, 50s? How far back do you think cannabis in Hawaii goes?
Might have been the 50s or 60s, but it's definitely, you know, been brought by people recently. It's
Yes,
there is no, and
Hawaiian
Maui
indigenous
Wowie was
species.
never a single variety.
No.
It was a name given to plants grown in Maui because they could market them for more.
As an old timer explained to me, if we grew it in Puna, we called it Puna butter. If we grew it in Maui, we called it Maui Wowie. And if we grew it in Kona, we called it Kona Gold, no matter what the seed source was.
Exactly.
I can add a little bit to this in that I got Maui Wowie seeds a couple of times when I was in Oakland in the 70s. And I grew them out. I grew one of them out one year where I just happened to take pictures of leaves, because I was just thinking, I have all these things, I should take some pictures of them. And so I just put out a towel and took pictures of all these different kinds of leaves. And the Maui Wowie, you can see, it's definitely an indica sativa hybrid. And so that was, I think that was in '79. It was totally between the Afghanis and the Kushes and the sativas.
Wow.
Well, my Hawaiian connection is when I moved to Oregon, the first people I met were these Hawaiian couple who bought up 4 farms all over Oregon and had people like me managing them. And at the time, we didn't know what was happening after we grew it and processed it. But they were taking the Oregon product, which in '78 was getting $1,000 a pound at the most, usually 800 to 1,000. And they were exporting it into Hawaii and selling it as Hawaiian, getting $3,200 a pound. And the authorities weren't looking for it coming in. They were looking for it going out. And so they did this scam for a couple more years after I broke away from them. But I found out about this whole thing after I stopped working for them.
When we were in Hawaii the last time, what we saw the most was, it was actually BC bud. It's imported, you know, by boatloads and distributed as Hawaiian. And most of it was grown indoors under lights.
My last trip to Maui, I was driving down the road in a secluded area, and some kid was standing on a 1-lane bridge. And as I went by, he said, "Bud, bud, bud." And I was like, okay, we'll pull over. So he came walking over, and as he was doing that, I pulled out some really, really, really nice dry sip that I had. And as he got closer, I was like, hey, I brought this with me, and, I was just curious what you have, but, here, try mine. And if you have something better than I have, I would love to buy some. But if not, then just, there's no matter to go back and forth with this, And I gave him put the flame to the pipe and, got the flame closer and closer and closer and closer. So pretty soon he got much more than he wanted. Kid's about 6'3", probably 300-pound local. And I looked in his eyes, and it was like you hit him in the back of the head with a hammer. And he breathed that out and looked at me, and he said, "I'm not going to show you what I have. It's leaves tied on a stick." And I was like, "Leaves tied on a stick? Oh, I want to see that." And he was like, "No, I'm not going to show it to you." And I was like, "All right." But for the rest of my vacation, every time I drove past that kid, him and his group would point at me. So kind of an unusual thing. But yeah, as far as I know, there was no indigenous strains.
When we were in Thailand and we saw real Thai stick, we used to do the Italian test. You take a Thai stick, you throw it against the wall. If it sticks, it passes the Italian test.
I've been going to Maui for 15 years, and I've had a similar situation. But as Kenny has, where I had a local try to hit me up with some stuff, and I make my own hash as well, and I gave him some, and he was like, "I want more." And now he's actually a good friend of mine still to this day. I see him every time I go to Maui. But growing on the islands is difficult. It was really destroyed in the 80s with all the helicopters, to the point where it's still ongoing, where the locals can only grow in very small batches. And yes, seeds are mostly European nowadays. None of the old genetics are available.
But it is legal for medical growing there.
Now it is, but people back, they try to do different things in different cities, and whenever they would try to speak out, the police would just come and kick in their doors and take everything, and nobody would be charged. So it was just constant stealing and harassment to the point where the growers would give up in frustration.
The marijuana club in Hilo, Hawaii, run by Roger Christie, didn't turn out too well. They came and they got him. They kept him incarcerated with no charges and no bail. So they play very nasty over there when they want to.
Yeah, and Paella, they tried to do one about 10 years ago, and it was a haole who came in, and then he showed up and started being belligerent at the local town meeting, pissed off the sheriff, which is not easy to do when you come up and start yelling at them, and he got busted, and they were harassed and shut down, and it had to go back into the underground. But they tried to do an actual dispensary there in Paella, but that didn't last more than a few months.
I forget if you can grow 5 or 6 plants legally in Hawaii as a medical patient, but you also have to give the GMS location of each plant.
They have to be tagged. A friend of mine who lives out there was just saying that they had some black helicopters, guys hanging from ropes with chainsaws, landing, cutting down plants that weren't tagged, and then scooping back up. They hit about 10 of his neighbors that he told me just the other day. So they're still dealing with that kind of stuff out there. There's still such resistance to the whole thing.
They also spray them with the green dye herbicide from a helicopter.
Wow, really? They come down and just poison
No, they
you?
don't come down. They just sit up in the helicopter and squirt it.
Yeah, and that's one of the main reasons why they continue to do is because the government is subsidizing them flying those helicopters, and they cost a lot of money. For back in the day, it was for every hour in the air, there's 4 to 5 to 6 hours of maintenance on the ground. So it's a great money maker for the helicopter manufacturers and pilots that constantly lobby to make sure that they can consistently do the harassment that they've been doing for decades.
Well, if you go back to the beginning of cannabis prohibition, and when Anslinger was trying to basically push our prohibition around to other countries and get them to sign what became the 61 agreement, the single treaty agreement, what they were also doing is contractors who made the chemicals were chasing around these governments like ambulance chasers and saying, hey, hire us, we'll come in and we'll defoliate all this, marijuana you have growing so you can be in compliance with the United States. And they went and they poisoned everywhere. Every country that signed on had to have a marijuana eradication program in place. So this was a huge money machine for all of these people that were running around basically trying to eradicate cannabis from the world.
I'm a cannabis eradicator.
Think about.
I'm a cannabis eradicator. I just burn it up a little bit at a time.
We're all eradicating it gram by gram.
It's in small series of fires.
So Sam, you said you actually have been to Thailand back when they were producing Thai sticks, so to speak.
Absolutely.
Because I talked to one smuggler and he was telling me, his product was tied on a stick, but it never touched Thailand, that he produced it in Cambodia and then brought it in on fishing vessels, so to speak.
That was much later, because when I was there, you could buy kilos and a ton if you wanted, all on the stick, all leafless, no seeds, so sticky it was mind-blowing.
And at the same time, the Zionist Coptics were doing what they were doing from Jamaica. That was quite incredible feat what they accomplished.
Why was it on the stick? Was it what like this is the thing?
If you go to Thailand, they put everything on the stick. Chicken, they put frogs, they put everything on the stick when they sell it in the marketplaces.
But is it just because they sold it in longer branches? Because obviously all cannabis is on a stick. Right?
Because it was little buds tied onto a stick. There was no sticks, cannabis sticks. There was
an easy form of weight and measure.
Bamboo.
Really? It wasn't a cannabis stem. It was a piece of
Absolutely, it was bamboo. I've been to where they manufactured them.
Yeah,
I agree.
When I saw my first Thai stick, when I saw that it was tied to bamboo, I said, "This isn't cannabis. This, and they're like, "That's how it comes."
Yeah, the buds for most of the cultivars in Southeast Asia really don't amount to much at all. I only grew one Thai plant that I would say had pretty good buds, but most of them, are intersex. have really what you would call running buds. And the only way, like when I grew Cambodian, we made Thai sticks out of it because there was no other way to deal with it. It just looked like a bunch of leaf but it was very sticky. And I'll tell you, they dried beautifully and they smoked fantastically. We were shocked by how good they were.
You know the reason why Thai has such a high intersex problem? It's because of the growers there kill all the true males because they grow Simsimia. And what happens is any pollinations happen from intersex plants, which increases every year the percentage of intersex plants. I mean, I've grown thousands and thousands and thousands of imported Thai seeds I collected all over Thailand, and I'd say the vast majority of them were intersexed.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah.
Did you ever go to the Philippines?
I was thinking of going there next week. You want to come?
I watched the television show Locked Up Abroad, and it tells the tale of a man who went to a town called Sagada, Sagada.
Okay, so forget the Philippines. Let's go to Turkey.
Yeah, let's go see Rob.
Another good place, right?
Yeah, you've seen the travel film Midnight Express, yeah?
Called it a travel film.
It's not about
Travel nightmare is what I thought that was.
Yeah, he doesn't travel far.
Right. I've never seen a coat hanger become such a malicious piece of equipment in a film in my life.
But when I watched that, I never realized hashish was being produced in small hand batches in the Philippines, in that little village. It's way in the north.
And how were they making it? Dry sift?
I think dry, hand rub.
How can you dry sift in high humidity?
No,
it's almost impossible.
Rub. No, or hand rubbing.
Yeah, okay.
What areas would you guys say are indigenous hash producing areas? Where have they been producing hash for the longest? I was surprised I asked this because I was surprised to learn that Morocco has only been making hashish since, I believe, the 60s.
Yeah.
Correct.
Morocco is much more recent.
So what's the oldest hash producing region?
Good question. I would think it would be probably someplace like the Himalayas where they're making hand rub before they made dry sift.
Right, Nepal, Pakistan, Afghanistan, somewhere around there, I would guess. What does Rob say? I don't remember.
How long have they been producing, say, in Lebanon?
I don't know what the oldest is. I really don't know. I haven't seen very much history about Lebanese hashish pre-1960 or 70.
What about the Persians?
I don't think so, but I don't know, to be honest. They were right next door to Afghanistan. And when I went to Afghanistan in 1971, you could buy a kilo for $5.
Yeah, those days are gone. No more hippie hashish trail.
No,
there's still a hippie hashish trail. There's just no hippies or hashish.
Right.
I know somebody that was doing short path distillation on the hillsides of Kabul in 1972. I'm going to try to approach him and get him to come on the show because it's quite an unusual situation, and he tells incredible stories. It was Northern California, Berkeley-based individuals that were buying lab equipment, sending it to Karachi, driving it to Kabul, and producing on the hillside with ether, and then doing a short path distillation.
Are these people connected with the Brotherhood?
No, just local Berkeley people, friends of friends. So then they were just shipping it back to Berkeley from there. But, he tells, fantastic tales like, one time the man that he bought his hash from shows up to his lab, so to speak, and he sees some of his Berkeley friends over in the corner, and they're basically taking blocks of hash and putting it through screens so they could powder it and open up the surface area for extraction. And the guy kind of got dismayed, and he asked him what the problem was, and he pointed to the hillside all the way up the other side of the valley, and he said, well, my guys are up there pressing that stuff, and your guys are here tearing it apart. So, well, we should
what they
mitigate
should have
that
done
and
was
just
brought
bring it to you
the
pressed.
best.
So they started bringing in gunny sacks full of dry sift, and but one of them got the bright idea that they should maybe mix sand in with it. So then the quality of the product they were getting started to deteriorate, but they were getting large amounts of garbage in their glassware. So they told them, look, we're not going to buy your stuff anymore. And then they could put their finger in there, taste it, see how much sand's in there. And since he figured out that they had a method to see how much dirt he put in there, they stopped selling him dirt. But it's quite a
was that pressed, Kenny, or was it unpressed pollen?
Well, at first they were getting it pressed, and then once the guys seen that they were just turning around and breaking it up again, it's like, we're doubling the labor. My guys are pressing it, your guys are breaking it up. Why don't you just buy it unpressed? We got gunny sacks full of this stuff, you know? But then making really incredible see-through oil and sending it back to Northern California.
Well, can I ask you this? When did honey oil hit the market? When did they start using alcohols?
I saw it when I was in Afghanistan in '71. It was over in India also at that time, but the vast majority of it was exported because it was worth so much.
Yeah.
Were there other machines other than the Honeybee 454 advertised in Sensimilia Tips around the 80s, Tom? You're muted, Tom. You might have to unmute yourself.
No, that was the only one.
How popular was the process? Were there many people buying those things and using them to turn their cannabis into honey oil?
In the Eugene area, he sold a lot. And then I think he did a few mail orders, but mostly as a local item in Eugene.
Wow. That's interesting. But yeah, it certainly became a legend to anyone who had ever encountered it. And, you know, it absolutely has to be what, you know, inspired what we have now when you look at shatter and butter and everything else. It's clearly the dream.
First time I saw honey oil, I quite literally could not believe it.
The first time I seen it as a kid in 1980, I was absolutely fascinated. Not as much with the intensity of the high, but the incredible flavor that it had. That's what really went straight to my pleasure center and told me that was a different animal. And it wasn't
That's what I was wondering about your Berkeley friend that was making distillate, because distillate isn't really tasty or smelly, is it?
Well, he was starting with a high terpene content product, be it dry seed. So I'm sure whatever he was producing was pretty nice, you know, and see-through, not dirty black oil or chlorophyll filled or anything like that.
All of the honey oil that I saw, absolutely. I mean, if you put a drop on your tongue, it was like totally spicy, peppery.
Yeah, absolutely. Mm-hmm.
And that's from the terpenes.
Sure.
Pure THC has no taste.
Yeah, kind of a long story around that. Actually, today, when you kind of spurred my interest when you started tracking down the individuals from the book Hashish. My first experience with that was in 1980, and I lived in a small Northern California city. And a friend of mine came over one day with a garbage bag full of green marijuana, and it looked like it was, pulverized, so to speak. And he told long tales, and I asked him, where did you get that? And he said that when he went out to empty the garbage that day, that it was sitting next to his garbage. And I said, well, I don't think anybody just snuck marijuana on you like that. So it's kind of odd to me. I found it, and we tried smoking it, and it gave you a hell of a headache, and then there was, back in the day, lots of misnomers like, hey, you know what? You take it, you put it in a container, you put some orange peels in there, let it mold, and it'll make it stronger, So as a 13-year-old, I gave that a try, and that didn't work. And pretty soon, Philip came over with some more of that weed, and I was like, I don't know, man. Maybe we should roll bigger joints of that. It just created a bigger headache. But
maybe it was from Kansas.
Yeah, it was still kind of puzzling, like why in this little Northern California town was this garbage bags, or not garbage bags, but brown paper bags showing up of this marijuana. And then his older brother one day was at home, like on a weekend, and sleeping past noon, and there was banging at the door, and he opened the door, and there was the new neighbor, and he asked the neighbor, what do you want? And the guy was like, hey, can I put some stuff in your garage real quick? And he was like, I don't care. And then went back to bed. A couple hours later, there was more banging on the door. He opened it up, and there was the police, and he said, you can't come in without a warrant. And they said, just calm down, Randall. They said, get your pants on, come outside. So he goes outside. They said, can we open your garage? He said, sure. He knew he didn't have anything in there, but he noticed there was dolly tracks back and forth, back and forth, back and forth in the mud between the neighbor's house. They opened up the garage, and all he could see was like jars full of psilocybin mushrooms, and the other half the jars were full of hash oil. And he looked over at the neighbor's house, and it was on fire. So this is where the honey oil was coming from. So I never forgot the name of the man who sold me that for $25 a gram. I recently looked him up. I'm going to call him up, but I also called up the local police department because I'm going to go look up the address of the house. My neighbor said that, or my friend said that those people, one of them was Australian. So I can't wait to find out why a man from Australia was in a little bitty Northern California town in 1980 making some of the most incredible hash oil I ever seen.
Pretty much proves you've got way too much time on your hand, Kenny.
Yeah, I tend to focus on little things with my ADD, you know. I think the man that sold it to me is going to find it more unusual when I call him later today and say, hey, how's it going? Remember that stuff you sold me 35 years ago? I want to know where you got it.
Well, the origin of all this stuff, I think, it intrigues all of us. And even the people like yourselves that were there first. It's been of interest to us all where it roots from. You know, can I ask Tom and Mel and Sam? I spent time with Ed Holloway, the old man that taught Bernard Brunning, who founded the Mellow Yellow coffee shop and later Positronics, how to grow seedless cannabis. And old Ed was from Oregon, and he was quite the older gentleman. And I could tell a lot of stories about him, but I was wondering if you guys had heard about him, and because he was growing cannabis in the 60s before even you were, Mel, and I was wondering if you had heard of him.
No, I mean, the name is familiar, but I don't know him. I don't know about him. You know, even Sinsemilla, the concept of not growing fully seeded plants, I definitely knew that because I was hand pollinating when I was in New York, but I hadn't heard the term Sinsemilla until I came to California. You know, that was probably the summer of '75. Yeah.
I saw my first Sinsemilla in the very late 60s or maybe 70, and they were friends of mine were bringing boxes and boxes of herb up from Mexico, and they showed me the same plants from the same field, some seeded and some not. And I said, well, which one's the best? And they said, well, get both and try it. So I did. And the first thing I saw, number one, is seeded is half seed weight. Unseeded is not. Besides the fact it's also better.
Yeah. Right.
What inspired Sinsemilla Tips to be named Sinsemilla Tips, Tom?
Well, my first experience was when I moved to Oregon in 1976, and I immediately met growers in Roseburg where we settled the first year. And so for 4 years I had been growing it. And so when the bus happened and I decided to do the magazine, we threw around different Sinsemilla variations, but a friend said you should call it Sinsemilla Tips because you'll be given tips on how to grow it. And so that's how it came.
Brilliant. When did you first hear that term, Sinsemilla?
Who are you asking?
Tom, who was just speaking. I was asking him when he first heard the term Sinsemilla.
Well, when I first moved to Oregon in '76, they were calling it that.
Wow. So mid-70s. Wow. It's amazing how much has changed in these 40 years.
I saw it in the late 60s or 70, and the first thing I did was I looked up the Indian Hemp Drugs Commission report and started reading those, and I realized, man, they've been doing this in Bengal for more than 100 years.
I know.
How about the Back to the Future moment this week when the governor of Nevada declared a state of emergency because they ran out of cannabis? It's like, who would have ever thought that would have happened?
Well, actually, they didn't run out of cannabis.
Well,
They ran out of a delivery system because I think as a token to the alcohol industry, the way they wrote the law is that
Right.
that existing industry would be in charge of distribution. But unfortunately, very few companies signed up for that, and they just didn't have it. So they're doing some sort of emergency legislation to get, other delivery people to do it. But this probably being.
I always figured it was because, you know what they say, something about what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. But obviously the cannabis didn't, and it was all taken everywhere and gone really fast.
Exactly.
It's fantastic to see Nevada, of all places, turning around and becoming such a legal space. I mean, we were, 25 years ago when I was touring with Jack Herrer, we were thrownotic champs because the Emperor Wears No Clothes having a leaf on it, and then they called the cops on our hotel room because, the thing probably had smoke coming out of every crevice. And Nevada police showed up and ended up not arresting us. It was very nice, as Jack tried to teach him everything in the book about hemp in 10 minutes. Yeah. But it was pretty funny, and now they're selling it, and I think it's just great.
One of the points I tried to bring up to investors in Las Vegas, who just seemed to be focused on how potent the different cultivars we had are. And keep talking about, is that over 20? Is that over 25? That sort of thing. And I told them, I said, look, you're going to have a huge influx of tourists who are going to be marijuana tourists. They may be the first time they've tried something in 30 or 40 years if they're older. I said, you don't want them smoking joints that have 20% THC in it. They're going to end up in the emergency ward. I said, what you want to do is create your own pre-rolls and have them down at a lower level, maybe 5, 6, 7, 8% THC at the most, so that people can actually smoke it and get high and enjoy it. But if you're naive and you smoke a joint like that and you just smoke it down before you realize what happened, the people start believing that they forgot how to breathe, that their heart is going to explode, all these other things, and they end up in the emergency ward.
Yeah, so but turn it around.
Have a good experience. So, I mean, give them something that they'll have a good experience with.
Or turn it around and give them stuff with 30% THC so we can get enjoyment watching them.
There's plenty of that around, though. Plenty of that.
Yeah. So I last saw Mel at the Vegas conference last November. I had been going, that was my 4th year going, and I highly suggest we all meet up there again because
each other. Yeah.
It's one of the best I don't know how to label it, but greed rush conferences there are, and more and more of our people are going to it. I remember the first year it was all suits and ties, then it started going to business casual, and pretty much last year was about a half and half of t-shirts and sport jackets. And so I think our community is starting to go to it, and I judge. Mel used to go to the American Booksellers Convention when we were publishers, and I judge conventions by the parties. And when we would all meet at the Booksellers Convention, Sebastian from Andor Press, and I think you came up to our suite, didn't you, Mel, a couple of times? Because we would meet after the show. And I mean, one time when Sebastian was publishing Timothy Leary, he was in our suite. And Bill Walton came, and Ken Kesey came, whoever had a book out. But if all of us go to the conference, maybe we can get together and do a show from there. Although I don't think it's on Saturdays. I think it ends Friday.
Yeah, that was quite a convention there. I mean, that was absolutely packed with people. It's hard to believe there were so many.
Now, yeah, it's moving to the convention center, which it's going to be double in size, I would imagine.
The amount of interest in this is actually blowing up everywhere. People are seeing this as a safe opportunity now, and I think they're seeing the benefits, and they're believing the benefits that other people are getting. And I think it's making a big difference in the way that they see the whole culture, and they want to be part of it rather than, kind of talk negatively about it. So this is interesting.
Is the Moscone Center underground?
Yeah.
Okay, because I remember a cannabis conference at the Moscone Center, like in 70, 72, somewhere around then. And it was pretty bizarre because people didn't want their names to be known, but they were all trying to sell not herbal cannabis itself, but books, photographs, calendars, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And there was hundreds of people there selling.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's where at Moscone is where I first met Ed. He was hawking your joint book, and Mel, and we met at the ABA 85, I think. But I had met Ed a couple years earlier, but he was there with a booth hawking your book to the booksellers.
Not hawking my book. That was 85. We were done by then.
Well, he had copies of your book that you co-authored.
Oh, okay. All right. Yeah, we had split everything in 84.
How long did you guys publish together for, Mel?
Well, we didn't publish together, but we were authors together on the first two books until 84. In the spring of 84, we divvied up our assets, basically. We owned a house together, and we owned the two marijuana growers' guides together. And we settled that entire thing in about 15 minutes. Wrote it up.
Well, I liked the way your house was. It was a classic Victorian. But the neighborhood, I could take it or leave it.
Yes, I had my car window broken 5 times in front of the house.
That was in a 2-week period, yes?
No, that was in a few years.
Mel, I'm wondering if you still get residuals from that book, How to Make Money Without Getting a Job or something like that. What was it?
Right. The one without a table of contents or any way to the jobs. I know.
There was some pretty interesting ideas in there.
And, and it screwed me and everything else. But, I got a very good deal out of it. The way we decided on the house price, we each got an appraisal and put those together, added them up, divided by 2. That was the price of the house, the sales price. And Ed just offered me the book for such a certain amount of money. And I thought that was very good. And as it turned out, it worked out very well for me. It really did.
I found that to be a very beautiful and comfortable house.
It was a lot of fun in the house. Yeah.
How many books have you published, Mel?
Published?
Yeah, how many books have you put out as growers' guides and various versions of it?
Well, the Growers Guide I put out, I think, in 3 versions. The Insider's Guide, just 1. The Hashish book in 2. And also I published a book called Great Labor Quotations. That was another one. And basically, I'm done with it. We're going to try to. The publishing industry is different. I don't want to be shipping books and everything else. I'm too old for that stuff. But we want another publisher for the Hashish book. Rob will update it, have some stuff in there about extraction, and give them suggestions on how to do that, and hopefully keep that book in print, and just update it as things change. There's a lot of work in that book. It's a very nice book on hashish, and I think it should stay in print. So
I always appreciated it.
What Rob needed was the photographs by Sami Laval, or equivalent thereof, for his book, because his book is mind-numbing, but most of the photography is fairly small.
Right, it is. Yeah. We tried to get a lot in, and it's a lot of pages on that book.
Yeah, what's it with this guy Rob Clark and all the words he uses? Him and words, lots of words. He will be joining us in the coming weeks too. He's just traveling and he doesn't have a good internet connection, but soon he will, and soon he will be with us. He was very enthusiastic about us doing this panel and being part of it.
I'm pretty sure Rob is marching in Istanbul to remember the attempted coup 1 year ago and supporting Erdogan.
Well, I'd like to mention one thing about last week's session. I did catch the part where we were talking about UV, and actually we did a UV thing. I think maybe it was 2010 or 2011. I have a friend who is an inventor, and he has a patent on UV transmission through glass. And so we did an experiment. We tried to redo the experiment that had been done by this Hawaii researcher.
Are you talking about John Lydon?
Yeah, I don't really remember the name, but you're probably right, Sam. But there's a couple of things. One is that I want to dispel to our listeners the fact that if you just take that glass shield off of your fixture and you just have the bulb there, it still is blocking the UV. I mean, I've seen it written that you just take that off and now you've got UV. That's not true at all. The glass on the glass casement over the filament is actually going to block the UV also. Right. When we did it with completely naked elements. So there was no glass involved at all. And we had it on a light mover, which went back and forth with one group and a control group next to it. And what we found the first time we did the test was that the buds closest to the UV lamp were vastly diminished in potency, actually diminished them seriously. So we went, we checked things, we moved things around, we made it less and everything else, and we did it again. And the second time we did it, really did it very comprehensively in that we created a 3-dimensional grid so that you were taking samples at every point you could imagine, from high to low and from front to deep. And we couldn't find any difference, really, any difference at all.
I did the exact same thing, and we both organoleptically tried it, me and Rob, and we tried it in our lab, and we could not find any improvement.
Yeah. Now, there's a couple other things. There is a glass that transmits UV. I mean, that's what the patent was about. And it's a common glass. I don't want to say what it is now because I don't know if it has anything to do with the patent anymore. But there's a lot of information about the benefits of UV to plants, right? And it involves more intense colors, more flavonoids, more nutritional value, resistance to insects, resistance to pathogens. There's a ton out there. There's even some on UVB increasing the density of covering of resin glands, which is something that interests me because I don't think enough has been paid attention to in that most of the concentration in terms of what increases your THC is about the genetics, how many copies of THC synthase the plant has, that sort of thing. But in actuality, the physical characters come into it too. How dense is your covering? How closely together are those resin glands? How big is the resin gland head? These things all are part of the equation too. I mean, I'm reminded of the first time I saw White Widow in 94 and 96 in Amsterdam and just looked at that covering and thought, wow, this is really dense covering. So, I mean, I think that now that we're able to grow, acres of stuff and do real comparisons and real selections of phenos, I mean, this is, it's hard to believe. I think that if you talk to any other bio company that was extracting natural molecules and told them that you could get 25–30% of a single molecule from a plant, they would find that unbelievable. I mean, you're usually talking about less than 1%. So it's pretty remarkable.
If you make dry sift resin out of your product, you can easily have it in the 50s or 60s, easy.
Oh, absolutely. But
which completely pharmaceutical companies, I gave them samples of my raw material, as I called it, and they just couldn't believe it. It's more than half of the target. How can that be?
Yeah. I know Rob told a funny story to me about visiting GW Pharmaceuticals, and the lead chemist, who we thought was a really brilliant woman, was talking to him about how if we could just isolate this further before we did our chemical reactions, this job would be so much easier. And he said, get me a bucket and some water, and I'm going to show you something. Right? Basically showed him, how to just do a water seed thing and isolate the resin glands. She was like, wow, I never thought of that. That's so. It's funny that you know, with all the primitive ways that we have done things and what we've learned through it, we've actually learned quite a bit.
Well, can I ask you this then, Sam? You know, water hash started not that long ago. A lot of people, I mean, don't realize that it's something that is roughly 25 years, 30 years old in the consciousness of the culture. You're one of the first people that bumped into it. Could you talk a little bit about when you first discovered water as a separation process?
Who showed it to me the first time was Neville at Cannabis Castle. He had an American grower come and visit him and buy seeds. Me and Rob went and visited him less than a week later. And he says, you got to see this. And he took dry buds, ground them up with like a coffee grinder or a spice grinder, and then poured it in water. And I just gasped, and I says, man, water's going to fuck it up. And he let it settle, and voila, you know, the hash sank and all the plant material floated. And it was pretty but to tell you the truth, I had so much fucking cannabis at that time that I preferred dry sipped. Even if the yield was a fraction of what you can get with water sifting, dry sifting is the gold standard. Water hash can be great, but it really depends on the variety and are the terpenes water soluble, because some are, and you lose a lot of flavor and taste. And that's the key part of your enjoyment with cannabis.
Do you remember what that flower was, Sam?
No, I have no idea. He was growing Northern Lights. He was growing skunk. He was growing all kinds of shit. So no, I honestly do not remember what he did it with. But I mean, me and Rob came home and we did it. And in his book Hashish, the photographs in my window are all there from the experiments that we did a few days later.
So did he immediately take the vegetable material out and made the hash, or dried it out? How did he dry it, or did he just show you the methodology?
No, what
you took
we
it
did
elsewhere?
was we at the time we were not using screens. We were just using tall, skinny glass like vases, and you could put about an ounce of ground up material in with maybe a liter or more of water, and stir it up a little, let it settle. And then you pour off all the top material and the water. And what we used to do is then pour fresh water in, let it settle again. And that way we got rid of most of the weirdness and gunkiness and anything that wasn't resin heads. So we were getting pretty good resin heads, but it wasn't as good as the dry sipped we could have made from the same buds. But you get 5 times as much, or 3 or 4 times as much at least.
Did you use a coffee filter, a cheesecloth, or how did you just scoop it out?
No, we would pour the water out just very gently so that we didn't disturb the hash resin down at the bottom until it was pretty much out. At first, we tried all different kinds of things. We tried pressing it, and that worked a little bit, but to tell you the truth, you should never press wet resin. What you really need to do is card and sift it out so that you can put it on like absorbent paper or something like that takes away most of the moisture, then press it. By pressing, I mean hand pressing.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, when I first was going to Amsterdam in 94 and 95 and 96, water hash was not in the conversation at all, really. It didn't come until later, 97, 98.
Well, I don't remember the exact date when Rob and I went over there, but I was thinking it was more like...
no, you were in the 80s, I would think.
But the late 80s, yes.
But it still took almost 9-10 years. I mean, you started selling the recipe for water separation in High Times, if I'm correct, right?
That's absolutely correct. And then... what's his name, Renard, or from that was making the big tall isolator machines. He came along, and then Mila, and then Marcus Bubbleman.
All right, over time, sure.
But Rob and I have been doing it for 10 years, and we learned it from a mysterious unnamed American who taught Neville. And Neville told us, man, the guy was only here a week ago. I've tried this a few times. You might want to try it. So we did.
It's amazing, you know, some random meeting at Neville's house turns into an entire industry, you know, 35 years later. It's pretty incredible when you think about it, you know, just, and by the way, it'd be funny if the guy that was there visiting Neville buying seeds from at the time, the Holland Seed Bank, would pop up and be like, hey,
I could swear his name was, I could swear his name was Mark, or it was at the tip of my tongue, but I just can't remember.
Well, it was 3.5 decades ago. It was a long time. What year did you first publish the advertisement for it in High Times?
I think it was 84. I'm guessing. I think it was 84.
Wow, that's crazy. 84?
Maybe it was 86 or 87. I'd have to find the magazine and because I've got it here, but it's in with a stack of High Times that are, you know, a couple hundred of them. I'm not going to look.
Yeah, sure. Well, of all the people you've sold haze seeds to, I think Neville has been someone that's made the biggest splash with them. If that makes sense, or he helped make them famous again in the way that he crossed them with Northern Lights number 5
What are you talking about?
Other plants. Haze. You furnished Neville with haze seeds originally, correct?
Yes, but that's not called haze anymore. It's called Neville's haze.
I first got your document in 1994, and I got it from Ed Rosenthal, and it just kind of changed my whole perspective.
I don't remember if I gave it to him or if he actually bought one through the High Times magazine.
Actually, I've got the fax. It came from Neville and says it came from you. So it came across on his fax, and he gave it to me.
Okay.
Very, very, you know, as we know.
So what you're saying is Ed actually owes me $9.99 because he never paid me for that.
No, like I said, it didn't come from the ad. I think, you know, either you or Neville. I think Neville sent it to him, and it credits that it came from you.
Nah, you know. Well, it wouldn't be hard to ask Ed.
Well, I've still got the document. I keep it in my records. It was quite a eye-opening document for me. You know, I spent many years just looking into it, and you know, the directions are very loose. But you know, how do you interpret this? And then I started looking at.
Is it the one that Rob and I wrote, where it ends by saying, "You can also do this in a swimming pool"?
I don't think that's at the end, but yeah, it definitely lays out the framework.
Yeah, we're saying you can do a ton at a time in a swimming pool.
Sure. But then I looked at it like, you know, the purpose of the purpose of the ice is to maintain water temperature. But then I asked myself, well, you know, also you have vegetative material grinding in between the ice cubes, which could possibly add contaminant. But then I told myself, well, if I use wet, fresh plant material, I'll get a higher terpene content. So freeze the plant material, leave it, which leaves it more pliable. Eliminate the ice, drop in a titanium water chiller, and then I started doing that on a 32-gallon drum. And then I called Mel, and I was like, "Hey, could you come up and shoot some photos for me?" You know, and then he came up, and you know, we wrote a very good story together. I think we
used to stick dry bud in the freezer before we used it.
Yeah,
but we never did it with wet bud because the resin that we collected still had moisture inside the resin.
Gotcha.
Like a fresh plant has.
Sure.
And it's much better if you age and cure resin before you start pressing it and stuff.
Sure. But I just wanted a higher terpene content. I didn't want to lose most of my monoterpenes in the drying process. So I figured if I just fresh froze it, put it in water, didn't use ice, dropped the titanium chiller in there, I'd get a highest terpene content.
Yep. You probably do get a higher terpene content. But water doesn't really belong inside of a resin head.
No. But then after that, I would dry it and cure it properly. I mean, some of the pieces I kept, probably the longest piece I kept was like 8 years, just keeping it to analyze it and watch its.
And by the way,
if you will,
the photos from that shoot with that I did with Kenny are actually in the second edition of Hashish. So they were in there from that shoot.
Right on, right, because the second edition of Hashish had an expanded section on water hash process because of the article that you guys put out together, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, yeah, water hashish was a big deal by the time, and that was one of the things we wanted to update the book with, was the water hash. It was very popular.
Will the third edition of Hashish have updates about solvent extractions?
Yes, but I'm not going to be the publisher. We're going to get another publisher, and Rob is going to update it, probably with some help from Kenny.
Sure.
But yeah, it needs that to round it out. It's the only complaint I've ever heard about the book is that it doesn't have solvent extraction. Of course, Rob starts the book by saying it's about hashish. It's not about, solvent extraction.
Well, I mean,
and the first book didn't hardly have anything about water hash, but he fixed that.
Right. Exactly.
Though, when you think about both water extraction and solvent extraction, they're relatively new. I mean, I was sitting with Rob in '96 working on the magazine for High Life magazine, and Rob was one of my best contributors and teachers and mentors and everything. And he was working on hashish while we were hanging out most of the whole year of '96. And the technology of water it wasn't on our lips. We were not talking about making ice water hash in 1996. We were not talking about making butane ash oil or CO2 oil or any of that. The conversation was dry sieve, pressing, and we had the inappropriately named devices from Mila called pollinators, which had nothing to do with pollen. She should have called them resonators or something. That would have been a lot closer to what it was. But we used to tumble our buds and then collect them, use cellophane, and we had these I-beam presses and custom plates we would heat up, and then we would press our dry sieve buds at Positronics, and that's how we were making the best hash we could at the time.
I made a bigger version of a pollinator that I could throw a kilo of dry bud into at a time. When I used to do that in the wintertime, it came out great. When I tried to do it in the middle of the summer when it was hot and humid, it was a complete failure.
Yeah, I guess it depends on a lot of environmental conditions that you're around. There's no question. I mean, I'm really glad that both water hash and solvent hash has crept its way into the culture, because it's given more people access to more clean and potent material. And I believe that especially when you get into the conversation about things like BHO, it has helped so many people because it has proven both safety, because if anything they said about high THC was true, all of these kids dabbing all night at, the secret cups and different various parties would be going to the ER, and none of them are. Everybody wakes up no hangover, feeling great. And the other thing it proved was effectivity, because take someone like Elvie Musica who has glaucoma, she has to chain smoke the cigarettes that the federal government gives her. But if she has the opportunity to medicate using dabs or a CO2 pen, she gets much quicker relief because of the concentrations of the cannabinoids in the products. So it's proven safety and it's proven effectivity in my eyes.
I have to go.
Oh, well, thank you for joining us today. I hope you can come on more often. You've been a hero to many of us for a long time there, Mel, and I can't thank you enough for...
It was fun.
Thank you very much, Mel. It's always a pleasure.
Always a pleasure to talk to you guys.
Have a great day.
All right,
Always an honor. You have a great one.
Tom, when did you first encounter Mel Frank? Back in the 70s or 80s when you started publishing?
No, it was 83, I think. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, you guys are, like before the dinosaurs in a lot of ways for us. There was just nobody around that was doing what you were doing, which is, to me, what is so impressive. I mean,
but then I hadn't seen him in probably over 10, 12 years, and I ran into him just by accident in Las Vegas at the marijuana business conference that the magazine puts on, and we talked and caught up on the old past times.
That's you. Did you do Growing Edge for 20 years?
21.
21. Wow.
I I started it a year before Sense Tips got forced out by Operation Green Merchant, because I saw the handwriting on the wall when they passed the drug paraphernalia bill, and it listed HID lights, hydroponics. They listed all these gardening supplies. I said, those fuckers are going to come after. So I started Growing Edge a year before the whole thing went down. And then when it went down, everybody from Sense Tips just immediately started getting Growing Edge and reading.
Wow. I did not realize there was that overlap. That's really brilliant foresight. I used to enjoy Growing Edge just as much. It was the way you kind of cleaned it up and made it mainstream was very impressive. You know, it was like putting a suit on the same message and sending it back out the door.
Well, I did a radio show for Sense Tips, and we had a cop and me, and I think it was on KGO when Ron Owens was still there on nighttime. And the cop said, well, Growing Edge is just like Sesame Tips. Those pictures of tomatoes, they're really marijuana. And, you know, they kept insisting that I was, you know, just doing a sanitized version of Sesame Tips. But in a way I was, but in a way I wanted to show how food was moving into controlled environments, and it actually did more popular than Tips, because it went up to 42,000 circulation, where the highest Tips ever was 21,000. So, and it took me to 20 countries around the world. It was a good gig.
Well, I did not realize that got such wide circulation. I picked it up every chance I could at every grow shop I could, but I didn't realize you're in 20 countries. That's so impressive.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have no idea.
I saw it when I was in Basque Country. It was there was a Spanish copy at where they sold mushrooms and seeds and grow lights. That's in Sebastian.
I would go
2001.
I would go to the American Society of Horticulture Science, which is all the university researchers from around the world, and it would be in a different country every year. It was the Controlled Environment Committee would have these conferences. And so I would stay an extra 3 weeks and just distribute it around the country. And so that was the main way it got distributed. But Homestead Book Company also distributed Growing Edge and got it around.
Wow, that's it's very impressive considering the uphill battle that you were fighting at the time, because you were right. Operation Green Merchant did come after exactly what you expected they would, the grow shops and the publishers and the people that were advocating for a lifestyle that they were against. And I still think what you were doing is heroic, especially now realizing that you spread this information to so many other countries. Because look at the way indoor cannabis cultivation is picked up all over the world. And now I think you're even more responsible for it. So
it's really easy why the Green Merchant went after the advertisers. Because then they could cut down all the High Times, the Sesame Tips, and all the rest of them. Because without advertisers, the magazine, how are they going to pay their bills?
And then bookstores were scared to carry Sesame Tips because they thought they were next. And so a whole bunch of bookstores dropped it. And it was a scary time, but it just made me more pissed off to do Growing Edge and make that more successful and get in their face with that.
It really goes to show that, you know, the fear of even the First Amendment, because here you are advocating or teaching people how to grow flowers, and people are afraid to carry information about gardening because they're afraid the oppressive government is going to come down on them because, you know, they're growing plants. I mean, it's almost insane to wrap your head around.
Well, I'm sure all these bookstores got phone calls from the local authorities saying, hey, you know who's making this magazine? I'm talking about Sesame Tips.
And
well,
then
my clue that it was cool was you didn't change the P.O. box from Sesame Tips to Growing Edge. So when I looked at Growing Edge, I was like, oh, this is the same people. So.
And then I took an added hit in growing in Operation Green Merchant because I had a hydroponic grow shop in Corvallis in 1980. I opened it, and we were at the time Hydrofarm's biggest customer. We were, because trucks were coming up from Humboldt and buying 40, 50 lights at a time, and the only stores at that time were in Seattle and Portland. And with Tips, I was able to advertise Full Moon Farm Products, which was the garden store, and so they took me out with Green Merchant because I was one of the stores. I got a call 2 hours before Green Merchant went down, and it was all the East Coast and Midwest stores saying, "We got the DEA in here, you know, they're coming at you next." And I look out the window and there's two, you know, Ford sedans with 4 people in each car. I said, "Those fuckers." So the toilet was in operation for a good while, and but they still got my seed collection, which I had thoughtful I had hidden, but they found it and destroyed it.
Yeah, I lost my seed collection 20 years ago this month to the U.S. government. It fucking still stings.
Tom, did you, when you were starting Growers Edge, did you find resistance from advertisers? I mean, how did you originally reach out to those hydroponic people? Were they willing to just jump on board, or were they reluctant?
Yeah, they were glad to do a magazine. It was basically the same advertisers in Sense Tips, and because they believed and supported what I was doing in Tips, they immediately advertised in Growing Edge. But then I also could get straight gardening companies that didn't want the stigma of Sense Tips, and so the advertising base grew even bigger. And then when Green Merchant happened, you know, it was the go-to place for companies like Hydrofarm and Sunlight Supply and all of the big suppliers, and even individual stores from around the country. But then Max Yield kicked our ass, and pretty much we faded away.
Wow, it's amazing. I mean, your resilience is incredible, and I'm glad that you got the hydroponic people to kind of turn around. They would not have an industry if it wasn't for cannabis, and if it wasn't for cannabis growers being able to afford their equipment. Ain't nobody able to buy their equipment if you're growing, you know, $10 a pound tomatoes. They're not even worth $10 a pound. So there's no way that the industry would be where it was today if it wasn't for cannabis. And without people like you informing people like me on how to use the equipment, what would they have? You know, they needed you. They needed Growing Edge, in my opinion, because if they didn't have that vehicle, how would they inform their customers? How would they get the word out about their innovations? You know, you are an integral, in my opinion, an integral part of our education, because, you know, guys like Kenny and I couldn't go to college and take this as a class. You know, Cannabis Cultivation 101 just didn't happen. So we had to find resources like what you provided, or we had no resources at all.
Well, thank you, but I don't, it would all happen anyway, but it would have. I just was in the right place at the right time, or the wrong time, depending on how you look at it. And it was a fun ride. I mean, at these American Society of Horticulture Science, there's some crazy motherfucking professors out there from Netherlands, from Germany, you know, and they're teaching at these top agricultural schools in Europe and Africa, and we would all meet together. I mean, oh man, and they all, you know, consumed, and we would go night on the town and just, oh man. My last one before I retired was in Peru, and this guy from Germany, I won't say his name because I don't know if he wants to be advertised or hung out to dry. We went out on the town, and the conference was at the Potato Institute, which had every single potato cultivar in the world under armed guard. They had M6 or AK-47s and stuff guarding the place because it was, you know, all the germplasm of potatoes. And we went out on the town, and we get back at like 3 in the morning, and the guard shack, nobody's in it, and it's like a 8-foot fence with barbed wire on top. So we had to climb the fence and jump over the guard shack on down, and it was crazy. And then we had another one, the same guy. We're in Israel, and all these international scientists, let's go have dinner at this Moroccan restaurant next to the Moroccan embassy. And so we go in, there's like maybe 12, 15 of us, all different countries, languages, everything. And they go, do you have reservations? And this German guy goes, yeah. He mentions his name, and they seat us, and we didn't have reservations. And they immediately bring us 4 bottles of wine, all these hors d'oeuvres, everything, and we're all looking, wow. And so we consume the wine and eat the hors d'oeuvres, and then we ask for more wine, and they go, well, the ambassador only arranged for 4 bottles, and we're there, they think we're somebody that we're not. So the way it turned out was the ambassador had arranged for this international delegation to come to this Moroccan restaurant, and they never showed up. And so we were their guests for the night, it looked like.
Excellent timing.
It was fun. And it's at these conferences, you don't go looking for people that consume. We sort of just energetically all just came together, cannabis consumers. I don't know, do we have secret marks on our forehead or something? I don't know.
I think it's because we're all smiling.
When I would go to scientific conferences, although they were mainly cannabis-orientated scientific conferences, everybody would seek me out, including Todd McCormick. I mean, he would find me immediately and say, let's go to your room, dude.
Well, you did have all the good grass. All the good hash, I should say.
I don't
all
smoke
the good
grass.
I knew you were going to correct me. I knew you.
Sam, how are you received at the International Cannabinoid Research Society meetings?
Well, a few people, like the head of NIDA, didn't like me. But most of the other people, they really enjoyed me. And Rob attended most of those with me. And we would give little presentations off hours on cannabis around the world. And all kinds of scientists would come and see this because, you know, they didn't really know. And to be honest, I turned on quite a few nameless scientists to cannabis for the first time because they always were curious, and you know they belonged to the International Cannabinoid Research Society, but they had never tried it.
It's funny, I was a member for many, many years, and then all of a sudden they changed their bylaws, and they got very elitist, and you have to have a degree to be a member. So I kind of went back and forth with them when they sent me a renewal of my subscription. But then they sent basically they wanted my curriculum vitae. So, you know,
well,
I gave
the
it to
last
them.
one in Montreal, Ed Rosenthal showed up. And as far as I know, he does not have a degree.
Yeah. So I'm not sure if he's a member anymore either, but I had to kind of.
As far as I know, he is.
Yeah. No. Yeah. I went back and forth with them, and they would not renew my subscription.
Well, Ed wears a white lab coat.
Yeah, so that makes everything better, actually.
I should try that.
Yeah.
Many of the people at the ICRS would call me doctor with my actual name, and I always laughed because I'm not a doctor. I'm a high school dropout.
You know, Rob was sitting at my desk when I told him I was a high school dropout, and he looked at me, he goes, 2 of my best friends are both high school dropouts. And I was like, who? And it was me and you. And I was like, oh, that is so great. You know? And he was proud, actually. We bucked the system.
The only time I got called a doctor is when I wrote Dr. Meshulam, and he wrote me back doctor. I was like, oh, because I asked him the question regarding yeah. So yeah,
His use of the word ensemble and entourage, absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, when I went between the two, and when he responded Dr. Fontan, I was like, oh, not true.
Back to school for you, sir. Back to school.
Not happening.
Yeah, it would be wonderful to have Meshulam on. His contributions to cannabis have been unparalleled.
Hunter S. Thompson's alter ego was a doctor, so there you go.
His alter ego.
Dr. Gonzo, yeah?
Dr.
Yeah.
Gonzo, yeah.
Dr. Gonzo, yeah. Yeah, I think he was the same as the Beatles, Dr. Robert. But hey, I wanted to thank everybody for coming out and joining us today on Talking Cannabis. It's been a great discussion. Sorry, the beginning of the show was a little bit rocky. You know, we tried to iron that out with Mel Frank, but reality happens. Thank you for driving over, hanging out.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
I can't get enough time with you. And Tom, always thank you. And
Well,
Sam.
thank you. It's a fun time.
It is. Thank you for telling the stories and being here to just tell the tales. It's incredible.
Yeah, in the future, I'd like us to start, being able to talk about some of the different topics and focusing on the different subjects on cannabis that we all know so well.
We should also get some killer guests and bring them on.
I just talked with Jeff Lowenfels yesterday. He wants to come on, so maybe next week or the week after.
I wonder if John Julius Norwich would come on and talk about the book. I know at 87 it'd be kind of hard, right?
And I'm not sure he can really contribute much other than contribute to the mystery.
Yeah.
Dr. Lester Grinspoon said he would be on as well, and also Chimera. He wants to come on and talk about genetics as well, and he might be joining us for more and more panels.
He's watching it right now.
I would love to get Rob on with his Professor Malberg and hear their conversation.
I'm not sure if Malberg is still active or retired completely, or I'm just not sure.
Okay.
And I'd like to go, with my phone or iPad into a grow operation and broadcast live from a grow operation.
Awesome.
We can help make that happen. We're not far away from one.
We can get Carl Hillig, who was Dr. Malberg's second cannabis student besides Rob.
Well, that'd be fantastic. Anybody watching, if you have any suggestions for guests you'd like to see on, shoot us a message. Everybody can join us at the community at the website's TalkingCANNABIS.live, and there's already 6,000 members on the community. You can be part of it and shoot me questions. And I think this is something we can all grow and learn from. You guys obviously are the teachers, but for me, sitting down and talking to you is always a learning experience, and I greatly appreciate it. And that's kind of what my goal was in sharing this, is that I get so much from the interactions with you and Mel Frank and Sam and Tom, all of you. It's a dream come true. As a kid that used to read about you, it's amazing.
Carl Hillig is also the person who basically developed wide leaf drug and narrow leaf drug, which Rob and Mark Merlin ran with.
That would be fantastic. It'd be great to have him on.
And also, are you friends, or do you see often Etienne Demosier?
No.
He did the book Diversities in Cannabis.
It's Demaye, I think.
Oh, you're talking about Etienne Demosier. Yes. Well, I do know him, but he wouldn't come on this show. He's never smoked cannabis. He doesn't like the smell of cannabis, and he's not interested.
A shame, because that's an incredible book that's only really becoming relevant today.
He's speaking of diversity in cannabis.
I got to say, it's the Mutual Admiration Society, because I feel the same way about all you, and I feel it's an honor to be with all you.
Well, thank you again. So again, everybody, we'll just wrap it up and say thank you. And next Saturday, we'll do this again. And until then, thank you for joining us. Let me click over here.
Adios.